During Season 16, I hit rank 1 by abusing ability haste stacking and snowballing an absurd amount of games. In this video, I'm going to explain to you exactly how to utilize ability haste to the high degree and why precisely it all works. Oh my god, that's like a double misspelled. Usually they misspell my name with adding 1p, but or removing 1p, but this is like 1z, 1p.
Today we're going to be talking about ability haste versus ability power, and we're also going to be including at the end for support mains comparisons with healing and shielding power. Recently, Azzapp made a video highlighting how he felt about ability haste, and he did a great job of explaining how the stat worked for people who might be confused about the idea that ability haste has diminishing returns. Unfortunately, he made some assumptions in how he would execute a combo on VelKoz and how you would do the math around how much damage output you would have over the course of a game or throughout the game that kind of end up making his assumption that you should be focusing on building ability haste on VelKoz actually incorrect. And so in this video, we're going to deep dive some leap math, talk about how ability haste works versus ability power, and when you should be trying to buy or prioritize each one when you have the option to in your build. So the first thing I want
I think what it's gonna boil down is to criticize that the exact math, because I think the math is fine, and I think the conclusion I give at the end is absolutely infallible as far as I can tell. But it's gonna be one of those where it tackles the 20 extra haste is not actually 20% extra damage, right? Because it's counting that you're gonna be using it at 100% efficiency. Obviously, there's a coefficient of efficiency that you're gonna be utilizing your abilities at, and also I noticed people in the comments were talking about, well, actually, you're never going to use two ults in a single team fight, that's a weird assumption. Very often I've had games where I did do two ults back to back, but it's more about the combat readiness and actually having the ability, for example, which is let's say you have your E again, and that means you're shortening the window where enemies can punish you, which means you can actually step more forward and actually utilize yourself more. Anyway,
I want to say is that league itemization and understanding how these stats work gets incredibly complicated, as we've seen when I did effective HP before, looking at health and armor and magic resist, and when it came to looking at the curve between buying AD and attack speed, which ends up being different for every champion in the game because every champion has a different attack speed ratio, so they get different amounts of attacks per second each time they buy the same item, like a dagger from the shop. And so there's a lot of nuances there that make things really complicated. For example, with AD versus attack speed, which was different than with effective HP, we had things come into play like, well, what if you have AD ratios and you don't just care about standing there and doing the most DPS by auto attacking, but you also have to take your AD ratios on your abilities into account and know how often you're likely to use those. And you also have other issues like in a real team fight, you don't get to just sit there auto-attacking on AD carry. Wouldn't that be nice? Instead, you're actually spending a lot of your time prioritizing your positioning and your movement over being able to constantly hit people. Meaning that if you buy a bunch of attack speed because on paper it says it's an efficient curve to buy attack speed there, but then you go 5 seconds without auto-attacking anyone, that's not really bad gameplay. That's just something you have to do as an AD carry as a practical reality of the game. And so when you get the opportunity to go in and hit someone a few times, you want to hit harder with less attack speed than having attack speed during downtime in team fights where you're having to prioritize your positioning. And that shifts your curve in reality because of this external factor more towards attack damage. In the same way, we have some issues with how ability haste versus AP are being calculated in the Azzapp video. Most notably, as we'll get into, the issue is that he assumed, okay, I'm just going to look at the damage I do when I do a full VelKoz combo with ult and then extrapolate that out to this is the damage I'm doing throughout the game. But in reality, even with ability haste, you're spending a huge percentage of the time throughout the game with your ult on cooldown.
With your ult up, not on cooldown. It's with your ult up. You're gonna have time when you have your ultimate, but you will not be using it. It's a different combat readiness sort of argument.
Look at almost any champion, it turns out when you include their ult, whether it's VelKoz or Orianna or different mage champions in the game, when you include their ult, they're gonna have a lot of base damage in their ult, and having that large cooldown decreased by a lot, and having that base damage be higher as a result sounds really efficient on paper or when you're calculating damage, but because you're not pressing R on VelKoz off of cooldown every time it's up, even with a lot of ability haste, because you're not pressing R on Orianna every time it comes off of cooldown, you lose that efficiency that you're supposedly gaining on paper from ability haste in terms of doing more damage. So in a real game, if you were building more ability haste or going that Azzapp build that focuses on ability haste, you're losing damage all of the times you don't have your ult up, and you're only getting more damage than the ability power build if you're spamming ult off of cooldown, which you don't actually do in game. And so that's sort of the problem with the logic there. There were also other mistakes that were made. For example, he looked at the base amount of damage that you do, including your passive, and then used the fact that, oh, I do this amount of base damage, and then I increase my amount of casting with ability haste to calculate how much extra damage he would get from his base damage with the ability haste build. Problem is that you reduce your other abilities, but you don't actually reduce your passive. Passives in League don't get reduced by cooldown reduction. And so because of that, this huge amount of true damage that he's getting from his passive was something that he added into extra damage he was getting from the ability haste build. And
wait, what? Hang on. I'm kind of lost on the thing. Maybe a wee bit lost. If we don't kill Anivia, we don't really break open the base. Actually, I'm just gonna force her to back off. Oh, she stayed. Who said I don't use my ult? Who said it's not really feasible to use your ult when it's off cooldown every time? Who said that shit? The amount of QRs we landed this game, just being combat ready all the time. And the good thing about those QRs, they're so good pressure-wise, I don't need to land them. It just does damage and pressures enemies, even if it doesn't execute. I do have a lot of haste. I'm sitting on 70. 2 ults in one fight. In one siege. Not really feasible you're gonna do it. Yeah, that's argument one against the video, I guess. But yeah, ability haste is ridiculously good. I understand that it's not one-to-one like the damage. If you calculate the damage, that's direct damage with ability power, or if you calculate the extended potential damage with the haste, it's not one-to-one because this has a lot of implied potential. But also, there's one thing that I listed in the favor of this one, which is the combinatorics of actually having more abilities. You actually get a lot of hidden values, which I didn't even bother to quantify because I can't. I literally cannot give you the value of having an ability up a little bit sooner. Like when you can shove the wave faster and have a bit of extra prio. When you can shove the wave and be combat ready earlier. When you can have less weak points because you have more CDR. When you land actually more passives, not equal, passives procs on VelKoz, they don't scale same. The more haste you have, the more passives you get because less passive stacks are wasted. Now that converts into extra true damage on your ultimate, okay? More percent true damage ratio on your ultimate. Okay, these are all very, very convoluted mathematical things which I cannot even possibly begin to try to understand or unpack. I just understand it kind of intuitively because I play the game a lot, but I cannot quantify that. I literally cannot. Without some deep machine learning AI that's doing this for such a long time, it's impossible for me to get coefficients that give you the value on that. The whole point is to make people understand how the haste works and how it actually converts into extra damage. People don't really regard it as damage very often. They think of it as a byproduct of just an item that gives you a little bit more like wave clear or something. They don't think of it as damage. The whole idea was to shift the perspective of people to when you're ahead, buy haste. And that's absolutely correct, infallible conclusion you can come up with that. When you're behind, you buy ability power. It's true for all mages, but specifically true for VelKoz because of the passive value.
If you're spamming ult off of cooldown, which you don't actually do in game. And so that's sort of the problem with the logic there. There were also other mistakes that were made. For example, he looked at the base amount of damage that you do, including your passive, and then used the fact that, oh, I do this amount of base damage, and then I increase my amount of casting with ability haste to calculate how much extra damage he would get from his base damage with the ability haste build.
This is the thing that stumped me on 2x speed.
That you reduce your other abilities, but you don't actually reduce your passive. Passives in League don't get reduced by cooldown reduction. And so
how does it not though? Like, am I crazy here? Isn't it like the opposite? That's how VelKoz works. The more abilities you do, the more passive you get. Like the direct amount of ability, extra abilities that you output is the direct extra amount of passive. Literally, I just explained this concept. It's not even that it scales normally. It scales actually more in favor of the passive, because if you have more ability haste all over the regular abilities, by proxy you're reducing the cooldown of the passive because you get more procs of it. And then the more ability haste you have, the less wasted passive you have. Because VelKoz passive works with regular abilities. Like if you do 20% more abilities, you're going to do 20% more passive procs. In fact, it's going to be more than 20%. It's going to be slightly above 20%. No, VelKoz passive does not have a cooldown, but your abilities do. And reducing the ability cooldown reduces or increases the numbers of passive. And it's not even directly, as I'm explaining, because there's less wasted stacks. Because very often, let's say you're going to apply a stack with a Q and never follow through and do nothing with it, okay? But if you have haste, not only do you get to dish out more Qs, but maybe you have a chance to chain in the Q on the previous Q, which extends the passive to 2 stacks, and eventually you proc it, and you get an extra value on the passive. It's not even percentage up. I mean, I feel like he's wrong here, and he's talking about as if I'm making a literalist conclusion that this is 1-to-1 damage ratio, okay? If you do haste, and I literally mentioned this, like if you have 500 haste, it doesn't mean you're going to do 5x your damage. Like everybody can understand that. The point is to make people understand that actually building haste can contribute to your damage output throughout the game in a consistency sort of way. When you're ahead, spam haste, spam consistency, spam access, okay? I could even make arguments here, and this is something that I thought about doing, but I didn't go into because it's a little bit too complex and too theoretical, how buying, let's say, Zhonya's allows you to do more damage, for example. Because buying Zhonya's is better than Shadow Flame in a lot of cases, because Zhonya's allows for more aggressive positioning and allows you to actually play the game in a lot of cases where you weren't able to play the game. So buying Shadow Flame, which is more damage, gives you less damage. That's buying access, right? That's one of the points. I mean, why would I even mention then in the fact that like when you're behind, you're not supposed to buy haste because of the whole understanding that this is not exact 1-to-1 damage ratio, okay? It doesn't matter if you can do many rotations if you do 0 damage. 1,000 times 0 is still a 0. If you don't do damage and can't kill enemies, it's not worth it. Yeah, I don't know.
So because of that, this huge amount of true damage that he's getting from his passive was something that he added into extra damage he was getting from the ability haste build, and it doesn't actually work that way. On the other hand, I would actually throw in his favor that his passive does true damage, and so I would actually, even though you can't include it for the ability haste part, actually for the AP ratio, it benefits the AP ratio again. He has a 60% AP ratio on his passive.
It benefits the AP ratio, it benefits the ult ratio conversion to the true damage as well. It benefits the combinatorics of actually getting more percent ults instead of less. It benefits in many, many ways, which I did not even attempt to quantify because I can't.
His passive does true damage.
Like I'm reiterating, like I cannot give you the value of having the ability up. No, like remember how we talked about the Zhonya's just a second ago. Having Zhonya's gives you more access, which in turn can be more damage when you're dealing with something like Zed or Talon or stuff that doesn't allow you to play the game, or Naafiri, for example. So in exact same way, let's say you're playing versus Lucian bot lane, so you're playing versus Ezreal bot lane, right? A bunch of these characters, you will be doing more damage by buying more haste because you have more ease up. And you have ease, which means you can step forward, which means enemies cannot dash into you. Because Lucian cannot dash, Ezreal cannot dash towards you because you can counter them with your E then. Again, having ease up gives you more damage. How do you quantify that? I can't! I literally can't. The whole point is to be not loose with it, but like not directly literalist in converting the ratios, because everyone understands this game is far too complex. I can't calculate it. There is value in it, but I can't calculate it. I'm not a computer. I'm not an alien. I can't deal with that. I'm telling you what my intuition tells me and like what my lived experience, and I'm trying to make good arguments for it, like hypothesis of it. You know, it's the same exact reasoning with the surrendering. It's hard to make an argument that never surrendering is always better because there is no world in which people don't surrender. I literally cannot summon data that doesn't exist. I cannot pull information from the universe that it's not ours. We don't live in that reality. So I can't give you that information really. I can summon it up from my experience, qualitative experience, and do like a prediction based on a couple of arguments that I've listed out. And that's exactly what I'm doing. We can intuitively understand that not surrendering is better, but like you can't really explain it like in a perfect sense.
Well, I don't think it's fair to say that 60% AP ratio on true damage is the same amount of damage as 90% AP ratio on a skill on regular AP damage. I think that you need to increase the amount of damage you're counting for in your math because it's going to be true damage. So if you were attacking a target with 50% resistances, for example, his passive would do twice as much damage if they had 100 armor and 100 magic resist, or in this case 100 magic resist, right? So I think it's actually fair to say that the AP ratio on his passive is more like 120% when we're comparing apples to apples with his Q, rather than calling his passive 60% even though it's true damage and his Q 90% even though it's magic damage. So that actually increases the amount of damage you would get from AP as a build as well, because you're doing more damage with your passive if you take into account resistances. You're doing more damage all of the time that you don't have your ult up, and if you're not using your ult right off a cooldown, and your you're assuming that ability haste works on your passive, which it doesn't. So when we actually take a look at VelKoz Q, for example, one of the things that
I still don't understand, like, how does it not? How do you not reduce the cooldown? Like, you're just rephrasing the way you're thinking. Like, it's not a cooldown of your passive, but like you get more of them because of more abilities.
Is that you're doing, well, let's go back to talking about, like he explained, how ability haste works, and then we'll know where these numbers are coming from. So ability haste, each point increases your frequency that you're casting abilities, and therefore your damage output or your DPS by 1% for every 1 point of ability haste that you get. If you have 100 ability haste, you double the amount that you're casting, therefore you're doubling your damage output without having to take resistances into account or anything like that. So that's nice. It's very similar to how armor and magic resist work, where people feel like there's diminishing returns, because when you buy your first 100 armor, you get 50% physical damage. When you buy your second...
First comment is you spelled his name wrong. There's a guy, I'm not familiar, people just sent me the video. People said, like, did you see the video of the guy who said, like, your video is wrong? And it piqued my interest, but, like, the first criticism is just I'm being, like, very, very semantical and literalist, but, like, it doesn't detract from any of the point. In fact, it just, like, leads astray. And the second argument, I think it's just wrong. Just plain wrong. And again, like, he's giving a little bit of credit there, but, like, I didn't even go into the extra. I just mentioned a little bit other ways in which ability haste contributes to your gameplay, but I didn't bother to calculate them because I can't. It's not doable.